Hello and welcome. My name is Jeremy, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the Townseed tools that I have just released. This is a series of development tools for my new game Townseed that is being developed presently. I'm using these to make content for the game myself. However, if you're the kind of person who wants to have a lot of fine-grained control over customizing your own game experiences, or if you like to make mods and release them for other people to use, then my hope is that you will find this tool useful as well. So, at present there are currently two separate tools that will operate in tandem, the Metamaker and the Architect. We're going to start the process with Metamaker. So we're going to click in here, and I'm just going to do a sample and explain what I'm doing as I go so that you can get an idea of what this tool is for. So the first thing we're going to do is choose our template shape, which is this up here where it says wall full. If you click on that, we can see a variety of different template shapes here. So we can get a single door frame, a slanted wall, a pitched roof. There's a wide variety of shapes available that you will recognize from other games that allow you to build in this way. So you should be able to build a lot of structures in ways that you're at least passively familiar with. We're going to start with just a simple wall for now. And my objective for today is to make a Tudor style construction, which is going to be a combination of bricks, wood, and plaster. So we are going to start out by just filling the space here. So I'm going to choose as my current shape, which you can see I've got this sort of black and green soft-edged cube right now. I'm going to choose this shape here, which is a cham cube, and the cham cube is the lowest polygon shape that is available, and it is also the one that tiles the best. Now, this doesn't look like it's going to do a whole lot to make a wall. I mean, it's just sort of a blobby cube, right? But these controls over here on the left-hand side will be used to change the shape to make it fill the space. So we can make it wider and thinner, and you can see as I rotate around. And the controls up here are summarized on the left-hand side. But I right-click and drag to rotate my view around, and you can see that this cham cube has become sort of a thin panel. You're going to want to cover all of the blue area that's shown. The blue area is sort of the visible space that the template occupies, and the red area is the hitbox. So typically you want your shapes to be somewhere between the blue area and the red area. You can extend out a little bit if you want, but if you deviate from that too far, you'll get unexpected behavior when it comes to hit detection in game. So we're going to want to try to stick fairly close. So we're going to take this shape and try to fill this. Now, I could position this manually and mess with all of these sliders in a very meticulous and slow way to try and fill this shape. It would work. But if I click perfect tile down here, then a lot of that work is just done for me. If you click up here on show clones at the top of the screen, you can see the shape gets duplicated a bunch of times so that you can see how it tiles with itself. And this shows you that we are tiling pretty well perfectly. So we're going to hide those clones, and we're going to change the texture because we want plaster first for our wall. So plaster is in other and cement. So we're going to choose plaster right there. And you can see that now instead of this green stone, we have this lovely sort of cream colored plaster. And now we're going to start adding our wood beams. So we're going to go up here on the left side to new block, and we get another one of those black and green cubes. And I'm going to choose this shape, the beam. It's a bit hard to see with that other shape there, but the beam is just a long rectangular box, essentially. And it makes a really good starting point for if you are doing support beams and things of that nature. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this sideways at the bottom for like a baseboard. So the first thing I'm going to do this time, I think, is I'll choose my material. I think I'm going to go with the Tupelo wood because it seems to have a really nice texture. It's a good medium brown color. And we're going to use this for the wood on the construction. So first thing we're going to do is rotate this, not on that axis. In order to manipulate these controls, you just mouse over them and then roll your mouse wheel. Furthermore, you can use the greater than less than signs to move in increments of 45 degrees, which in this case is quite helpful. So we're going to just do that to quickly get a 90-degree rotation. And we're not very well centered here, so we're going to use these move controls to precisely move that shape. If you hold control while you mouse over, you'll get a much finer increment than you do normally. So for really precise controls, use the control key while rolling the mouse wheel. Now you can see we have a little bit sticking out on the side over here, and we need to expand that just a touch. So I'm going to just roll up on the y-axis here until that expands enough that I don't have obvious z-fighting with my shapes, and that seems pretty good. I'm also going to move the y position up, there we go, because we don't want this to hang too low relative to our other shapes. Oh, here we see we've got a little hint of that white sticking out, so we're going to roll just a touch lower. Oops, that's the wrong slider. Roll just a hint lower than that until that disappears, and that looks pretty good to me. I could make that narrower, but we're still within our margin of the red grid, so I think I'm just going to leave that alone for now. It also makes it easier for adding more later that we don't have to change lots of things to make them match. So showing the clones now, you can see that we've got a plaster wall that tiles nicely. The beam on the bottom does not necessarily tile well, but that doesn't necessarily matter because you would expect a building to have multiple beams anyway. So we're going to hide that. We can, in fact, I'll leave it on for now and show you how I'm going to deal with this. So I want a beam along the top too, I think. So we're going to have one on the bottom and one on the top. So this time, instead of creating a new block and selecting the beam, I'm just going to, with this beam selected, click copy block up here. And now I've created an exact duplicate of that block in the same place. So I'm just going to roll on my mouse wheel and move that one up. And this way, we can use the one from the clone as a sort of guide for how far up we should put this. Although I'll have to make sure that it works nicely with the top of the plaster as well. So let's hide the clones for the moment. You can see that the plaster is quite visible there. And I could fix that by moving the beam up further, but it flushes nicely with this at the moment. So I think what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take the plaster, and I'm going to do that by moving this slider over here until the plaster is the shape that's selected. And I am going to decrease the Y expansion slightly. We still have a slight amount of that blue showing through. So I think I probably should move that beam up just a hint more. Try to cover as much of that blue as possible. Show the clones again. It's not, pardon me, it's not perfect, but it's still pretty good. Next, what we're going to want to do is the texture here between the top and the bottom one is identical, and you can actually see how identical it is. So we're going to move the texture. And how we're going to do that is with the controls on the bottom left down here. With the offset controls, we're just going to offset both of these axes by a moderate amount until they look really quite dissimilar from one another. We'll update the clones, and you can see that now we have a nice difference between the two, and that should be fine. I'm going to hide the clones. Pardon me. Now, one of the characteristic features of the Tudor style construction is the diagonal beams that you expect to see. So we're going to start adding some vertical and diagonal beams at this stage. So this is also a good time to name our set. So here I'm going to just name this Tudor, and we'll leave that on default for now. So this is going to be the Tudor wall full. Default is the name of this piece, and you won't be able to change the name, the file name, to extreme specifics because it needs to be set up a certain way for the game to recognize what you're doing, but that should be all right. Just name it Tudor. We're going to save it, and now we're going to want a vertical beam. So in order to get a vertical beam, I'm going to duplicate this again, and then I'm going to reset the Y position here by just clicking on it to reset its value to 0. I'm also going to reset the rotation because I don't want it rotated sideways anymore. And now that it should be in the dead center, I can move it here to get it closer to where we actually want it. So you can see it's quite a bit longer than we actually require, so I'm going to put a negative value on the Y expansion. Or even better, actually, this is a good opportunity for me to show you the difference between the expansion and the scaling. So if I decrease the expansion, you can see that there's a little bit of a break in the middle here, where the textures and the silhouette of the shape they jag a little bit. So that's a result of us using the expansion here. If I use the scale instead, everything will come down in a more uniform way. So expand and scale operate very slightly differently, so play around with them to get a feel for what's what. We're going to make that the size we need it, and that's great, but it still looks kind of just tacked on, so I think I'm also going to decrease the Z scale to make it thinner so it doesn't stick out beyond the lip of the lower piece, and that to me seems quite a bit better. Also going to change the texture coordinates again, just to keep things from having the potential of looking samey. So that's pretty good. Now we're going to add some diagonal supports, I think. And show the clones again to get an idea of what we're working with. Some nice panels so far. We're going to hide those. So we're going to duplicate that standing beam, and we're going to this time move it on the x-axis sideways. And I'm going to put it about halfway in between, and I'm going to manipulate the texture coordinates straight away while we're in here. So there are two ways that I could get this to lean, and I will explain the difference between them at the moment. The first one is the way we're not going to use, at least not completely, and that's the tilt control. The tilt control seems like it's exactly what we want. It keeps the edges nice and flat. If I move this shape up and down, like if I move it, you can see that the tops and bottoms of that beam are nice and flush with the edges. However, we have a problem now where our texture is going up and down. It's not parallel with the edges of the beam. And we could fix that in a number of ways as well, but I think for the time being, we're going to not use the tilt control, and we're going to use the rotation control. Oopsie. We're going to use the rotation control instead, which is going to make the ends a little bit strange, but we're going to deal with that, and I will show you how we're going to deal with that. So we want it about there. We're going to keep scaling up the Y until we have our edges basically touching on both. And now we're going to use a tilt. Oops. There we go. If we use the Y tilt, you see we can keep our texture in line with the edges of the beam and also get the tips to be more flush. So that's pretty good. We're going to increase the Y value of this a little bit more because we want to make sure that that meets up with the top and bottom beams, and that seems to be okay. We're going to I think make this one even slightly thinner than the central beam because we want that to sort of tuck in behind. We don't want it to break the silhouette of the other beam. That seems pretty good to me. And if we show the clones again, you can see that it's pretty good. Now we need another one that's going to be opposite on the other side. And rather than starting again from the beginning and trying to match it, we're going to actually just copy this one and invert some of these values. So I'm going to invert, and inverting, you put the mouse over the control you want and you press the minus key, and that will just give you a negative value or a positive value. Like, it'll multiply whatever value is there by -1. So you can use this to quickly copy and flip certain values. So we're going to flip the X position to get it on the other side. And now I'm also going to flip the Z rotation to rotate it that way. And then I'm going to flip the Y tilt. And suddenly our shape is exactly where we need it to be. And it is perfectly symmetrical. It looks like our central beam might not be exactly perfectly in the right spot, since we've got some different points of meeting up here, but that's okay. We can adjust that as we go. Again, we want to change up our texture slightly just to make sure that everything looks like it's different. And we have our lovely beams on the walls. Now, I'm a little bit troubled at how this particular spot on the beam is higher up than the other one, so we're going to fix that. And let's see. Oops, that's not good. I'm just going to put that back just by clicking and dragging. In fact, I'm going to fix that other one by clicking and dragging as well. So we're going to select the beam we want to change right here, and I'm going to just pull that over until those are mostly the same. We'll update the clones. Looks pretty good. Although I feel like everything is sort of shifted over slightly, so I think I'm going to move the central beam ever so slightly to the left. And then I'm going to move the other two beams to the left as well to compensate, because it looks like they're not very well centered at the moment. That actually looks pretty good. So I'm going to hide those clones, and give me just a moment to check my reference here. Very good. It looks in this reference as though it is also common to have sort of a median beam, a median horizontal beam, in addition to the top and bottom beams. So I think we're going to add that. Now, in order to figure out exactly where to add it, I'm actually going to take our first shape, our plaster, and I'm going to really can this and sort of get it out of the way. And then I'm going to switch my template to the half wall template, and this will make more sense as we go, of course. So I'm going to get that out of the way, and now I'm going to take the top beam that we have up here. I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to move it down so that it will sit flush with the top of the half wall. And you know what I think I'm going to do as well is I'm going to invert the Z rotation value so that this flips over onto its other side. So we'll do that because it'll make our beam feel a little bit less samey, I think. And I'm going to continue moving that up until the blue grid is gone, which it seems to be pretty well gone there. And we're going to move it sideways until that's well covered. If it doesn't cover every tiny little speck, that's not the end of the world. It's a guideline, not an absolute. So, and now you can see we've got this sort of like easel looking kind of shape, but this beam is lined up exactly with where the top of the half wall will be. And now we can switch from half wall back to the full wall. And this means that because of using that position, when I put a half wall next to a full wall, you will be able to see that the shapes, they'll match up nicely. So that's why we're using that as a reference. Now we're going to go back to the initial plaster shape, and we're going to put that back where it was. So we're going to expand it back out. Because everything else covers up this shape, this one is the easiest one to get out of the way. So, and our edges all look good. Nothing's weirdly out of place. We're going to save, and we're going to show the clones. And you can see we've got this nice wood and plaster wall panel. Beautiful. Now we're going to move on to doing the half wall proper. And you're going to find that this is going to be real easy. Furthermore, I'm going to leave the clones alone. I'm not going to take them away. I'm just going to switch to the half wall. And then I am going to shrink the plaster, and you'll be able to see, of course, that the walls, the clone walls, all stay exactly as they are. They don't move at all. I'm almost wondering if it would not have been smarter for me to do the main panel with the beam on the side instead of in the dead center, so that it would cover the edge. In fact, I do think that that's a good idea. So here, we're gonna hide the clones. I haven't really done anything with the half wall yet. I changed that. I'm just going to load the Tudor wall, which you'll be able to see down here. Loaded. So in order to get this to work right, I'm going to select that central beam, which is there. If you're having a hard time seeing which object is selected by the reticule, which can happen if you have a lot of objects, press the G key or click on the grid over here. It's the same thing. It's just a shortcut to turn the grid on. And you'll see there's a very colorful grid overlay that will get put on top. And that never shows up in the game, but it's a good way to help you line up texture coordinates and to just really call into attention whatever it is you have focused on. So we're going to take this shape and move it to the very edge. And we want to cover all of the plaster. That's good. And now I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to invert the X movement value. Put it there. That's great. And I think I'm going to get rid of the grid and change the texture offsets again. Although if I have the grid on, you'll be able to see that the grid follows along with that, and so that's how it can help you match up texture coordinates if you end up needing to do that, and at some point we will. I feel like the central beam should be thinner than the side ones, so we're going to go find the central beam, and we're going to decrease the scale of the Z until that sort of gets pulled in. I might have to bring in the diagonals a little bit further as well. Also, we're sort of sticking out on the end here, so I'm going to decrease the Y scale and pull those ends in slightly. And then we're going to select our diagonals, which I actually want to... Do we need to move those, or are they okay where they are? I feel like I want to move them so that they maybe meet more closely in the center, but that'll be an easy fix. And I want to make them thinner so that they appear behind the central beam. So that's a 0.51 on the Z. There we go. I want a 0.51. There, it looks good on both sides. And now we're going to move our shapes. Now I'm going to save that. You can use Control S as well. You don't have to click on that every time. And now if we show the clones, we can see there's a bit of doubling up at the seams. So we have our beam kind of butting up against other beams. I don't necessarily think that's a problem. And when we get to making corners and such, I think that would be better. You can use the A and D keys to manipulate the direction your shape is flipped if you, for some reason, want to see it lined up differently compared to the clones. The spacebar will reset it. Now I think that wall is done. Overwrite that. That's fine. Now we're going to go onto the half wall, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with the plaster. See, I've got wood all the way around the panel, and that can make that reticule a little hard to see sometimes. So turning the grid on for something like that makes it really clear and obvious exactly what you're manipulating. I'm going to decrease this more than I think I need to. I'm going to move that down, and then I'm going to re-expand it to fill the space. And it should be as easy as that. Now we want to get rid of some of these other things. We know that the median beam is in the right spot for the top of that, so let's get rid of the top beam by just hitting delete block there. This is too high. In fact, these are all too high. So we're going to decrease the Y scale until that's much lower. And move it down. And I could do the same transformation on everything, but I think it would be easier to just delete the other one and then duplicate the one I fixed. So we're going to delete this, duplicate this one, invert the X position. In fact, I'm going to invert the X scale as well, if I can. Can I? No, I guess not. I figured a negative scale was not something I needed to bother with, I suppose. We're going to change the texture. Now I'm going to find this beam. Very good. And we're going to scale that back out to its full height. And its full width, for that matter. Now the diagonal ones, we're going to get those fitted in. This is too long. If we just decrease this, and then decrease this. See, that works pretty good. I think I want it to still reach the center though. So we're going to delete this one and just manipulate this for the time being. So I want to rotate this more like expand this out, and we're going to taper until that feels good. Expand a little further. I feel like it shouldn't be overlapping there, and that looks like it's almost certainly past the center point. So let's rotate a little bit less. That might work. You'll note I didn't further adjust the tilting there, but I think that since it's buried inside the other wood, it doesn't matter if it's perfectly flush. So we're going to copy that. I'm going to invert this value, and this value, and this value. And it's not bad. I would still like for them to meet in the center. So let's just fine-tune this ever so slightly. If you're the kind of person who's going to want detailed control over how your buildings look, chances are you're going to be a perfectionist with this stuff the way I am. So that's my whole reason for making this tool available. So I'm going to delete this one, go back over here, duplicate this one. I'm going to save all that in. And we're going to invert, invert, invert. Not perfect, but it is closer. That looks like it would be better. So let's delete this one. Go back here, duplicate, and then invert, invert, invert. That's nice. Okay, now everything looks nice and flush. Show the clones. Looks good. Save that wall. And now I'll show you something else about making pieces that match each other. So we have the half wall up on our clones right now, but if I go and I load the full wall, you can see that the clones for the half wall stay there. And that way you can see how everything matches up. So that's pretty good. You can go through all of these and you can make versions of everything. If you want to make a complete set, you probably should make everything. At the very least, you should focus on maybe making all of the walls or all of the roofs. You don't necessarily have to make walls and roofs for every style, because the roofing can be combined with the walls in whatever way you see fit. So, you can play around with all of your controls on the left side here to get a feel for how they work and what sorts of things you'll be able to do with the available shapes. The shapes are all listed here, so you have quite a large variety of primitives to work with. And all of your textures are available on the right side over here. And that is, that's the basics of how the Metamaker tool works. You use this to make various pieces. And in the next video, I'm going to show you how to use these pieces in the Architect tool in order to make a building. So, stick with me, and I'll be right back with another video.